Wealth created by slaves in the New World stimulated cultural changes within Europe. For example, when Europe began to prosper from the wealth exploited through its colonial settlements, wealthy merchants and aristocracies were created. Their leisure lifestyle and consumer demands prompted a new cultural movement. The aristocracy and middle class discussed new philosophies of religion, science, politics, and business. Their neo-cultural values justified imperialism, capitalism, and racism. Europeans espoused the belief that they were a superior race that had a mission to civilize so called inferior races. This ethnocentric view, this ethnocentric view was sustained by the broad sense of unity and community founded upon skin color, Judeo Christian religions, and an espoused work ethic and a belief in the organized exercise of authority. Europeans' theft of other people's lands was justified by their Christian piety. They believed that God had given land to all mankind to be cultivated. So their belief in their own racial superiority supplied the foundation and justification for their seeking to colonize and exploit the world. Throughout the 1700s, European nations competed for the control of territory and resources in the New World and exercised varying degrees of harshness towards the local inhabitants. As European settlers, as European settlers established colonial governments to supervise the displacement of wealth, as European settlers established colonial governments to supervise the displacement of wealth from the oppressed countries to the mother countries in Europe. The welfare of the exploited was of secondary importance. The calculating cruelty of colonization in Sir William Blackstone's statement that the king can do no wrong was a necessary and fundamental principle of the English Constitution. This political phrase clearly indicated the way Europeans felt about their role in exploiting slaves and Indians in the new lands. The English also buttressed their religious justification for colonization with a legal system based on the concepts of individual and private property rights. In response to criticism of English colonization, an unknown Englishman wrote in 1622 that it is lawful to take a land which none useth and maketh use of it. The Englishman undoubtedly was referring to an old English legal concept, the rights of discovery, which was in part based upon European legal doctrines, racial arrogance, and military superiority. It gave white European colonists the right to practice finders keepers with any land and resources that they discovered. With the cultural and legal backing of the rights of discovery, European whites believed that they had a license to steal. In his book, A People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn expanded on the way white settlers felt challenges to rights of discovery. Zen wrote, the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, created the excuse to, to take Indian land by declaring the area legally a vacuum, by declaring the area legally a vacuum. The Indians had not subdued the land and therefore had only a natural right to it, not a civil right to it. A natural right did not have legal standing. Native American culture had not generally prepared Indians to protect themselves from the land expropriating practices of the white settlers. White white society's legal concept of private ownership of property and resources was an unfamiliar concept to Indians who, like African blacks, were communal. They were communal. Shared rights and responsibilities for the land and its resources was the basis of their culture and survival. Conflicts between European and Indian culture were resolved at the expense of scores of Indians. When the first white settlers arrived in the 1500s, about 2 million Indians possessed the 2 billion acres that is now the continental United States. Today, about 800,000 Indians reside in some 200 reservations, a landmass about 2% of the original amount of land that they possessed when the Pilgrims arrived in 1607. Moreover, the lands that were set aside as reservations for American Indians were some of the worst lands in the nation for sustaining agricultural products, livestock, and human life. Due to white society's oversight and later discoveries of precious metals and resources, these reservations occasionally did produce wealth. Due to white society's oversight and later discoveries of precious metals and resources, the reservations occasionally did produce wealth. Stolen land, the second greatest wealth producer. Land ownership was second only to slave labor as a source of white wealth and power in America. Without the approval of the Indians, the London Company, an officially chartered immigration agency, sought to lure immigrants to America by substituting land grants of 100 acres to each colonial settler in lieu of the potential gold dividends. Other English chartering companies and colonial assemblies followed suit by offering land grants to newly arriving European immigrants. The practice of awarding land to the head of each established household was effectively used to entice European immigrants to America. These land rewards represented windfall wealth that ensured economic opportunity and provided them with the basic tool for earning a living. It also generated a sense of togetherness among European immigrants in a new land. The typical colonial family only needed 2 acres of land per capita to produce sufficient food to survive, says Stanley Liebergott in his book The Americans and Economic Economic Record. Liebergott further stated that the greed of the European immigrants changed the use of Indian land from limited substance to widespread cash crop farming, from religious inspiration to land speculation for capital gains. The land grants to assist colonial settlers served as one of the earliest forms of affirmative action in America. The grants have the grants gave immigrants basic level basic level of wealth, which they could leverage to purchase additional acreage, household, farming equipment, and bring black labor onto the land. This white only this whites only affirmative action program allowed three-fourths of America's colonial families to own their own farms. Land grants alone were not the only government backed benefit given to white settlers. After all, a new nation of aristocrats and a privileged class could not be built simply on the basis of land ownership. Without an available pool of labor, land without an available full pool of labor, land had little value. It had to be cleared and brought to production. To achieve a maximum return from the land, the white settlers needed two things: cash crops and goods for European and local markets, as well as a well disciplined, available non compensated, and permanent labor supply. The free white labor force would not satisfy these criteria because it was scarce and expensive. Few European immigrants were willing to till the soil for another when free and cheap land was available to any white who wanted to homestead. If European serfdom if European serfdom had taught the Pilgrims anything, it had taught them that it was essential to own one's own land and strictly avoid being bound to another's land. Land distribution. Total land area of 50 states. Millions of acres. Oh well. Most land in the United States was once public domain. Half of the entire national area was once public domain, but has been disposed of. States were granted a large portion of it. Other large areas were sold or homesteaded, but a variety of disbursements were employed. Shortly before the Revolutionary War, wealth had accumulated in the colonies, and the settlers were some of the richest people in the world. Less than 2% of the American immigrant population had zero or negative net worth. England's tariffs and economic acts that sought to redistribute the colonies' wealth to the mother country triggered a backlash of independence. After the war, the new congressional government established its own devices for transferring wealth to preferential groups. Westward expansion added new wealth building opportunities through land and slave ownership. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 opened this new territory for homesteading. The government sold the land at public auction for $1 per acre to ensure that this land would not end up in the wrong hands. Congress in 1790 passed the first national naturalization law, which specified that America would open its doors to white immigrants only. Local governments enacted anti-mobility and anti-contract laws that permitted blacks to either own or even step foot onto land in the new territory. Thus, government land policies had a double benefit for whites. It gave them an opportunity to gain land, and it laid the foundation for a permanent wealth gap between them and blacks. Slaves forced France to sell Slaves forced France to sell Louisiana Territory. In 1802, just as America was on the verge of being squeezed out of the international cotton market, black slave insurrections in the Caribbean islands gave America a land windfall. Slaves successfully revolted against their oppressors and their French oppressors. A self-taught Haitian slave named Toussaint Louverture led a slave revolt that, with the help of Yellow Fever defeated a 20,000 strong French army. Without a doubt, the Haitian revolt took advantage of the only time during the colonization of the New World that white slaveholders dropped their guard enough to allow slaves to break free and take control. Napoleon sent a French military expeditionary force to recapture Haiti, but the French troops were beaten, thereby forcing France to sign a peace treaty granting the slaves their freedom and Haiti its independence. The broader international white community operated from a policy that a threat to black slavery anywhere is a threat to black slavery everywhere, but neither the United States nor any other country bothered to assist France. France's defeat at the hands of the slave army destroyed Napoleon's dream of building a French settlement at the mouth of the Mississippi River at the current site of the city of New Orleans, and set the stage for the United States to purchase the Louisiana Territory for a mere $15 million, less than 5 cents per acre. The purchase of the Louisiana Territory, which extended from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean, doubled the size of the United States. Ironically, the Haitian Revolt provided additional land for raising cotton, which justified the expansion of black slavery. Shortly after, old planters and new immigrants joined the land rush to acquire huge tracts of new free land. They echoed the national slogan for pursuing wealth: open more land and buy more Negroes. Mm-hmm. European whites were given ownership to the land, and black slaves were given the obligation of picking the cotton for the next 150 years. Picking that cotton, picking that cotton, picking that cotton. Spain follows France's lead, sells Florida. During the early 1800s, Florida was the only part of southern North America that did not belong to the United States. Though the U.S. government had made numerous offers, Spain refused to sell Florida. As Spanish territory and not a part of the United States, Florida was a natural attraction for displaced Indians and runaway slaves. Escaped slaves took refuge in Florida and established geopolitical relations with the Indians. Slaves and their mulatto offspring were often given high village positions as chiefs interpreters, military advisors, and scouts, all of which arose, all of which aroused Southern white slaveholders who saw this as a lure to slaves seeking freedom. With planters and slaveholders encourage white white planters and slaveholders encouraged General Andrew Jackson, who was noted for grabbing Indian land for his friends and personal ownership, to use his military forces to remove from Florida the Indians and escaped slaves. General Jackson General Jackson complied, publicly arguing that Florida was a sanctuary for escaped slaves and marauding Indians who presented a menace to white society. Florida, according to Jackson, was essential to the defense of the United States. In 1814, having established his public premise for taking military troops into the Spanish territory, Jackson intentionally triggered the first of three Seminole Wars. Jackson also burned Indian villages, seized Spanish forts, and blew up Fort Negro on the Chattahoochee River in North Florida, killing more than 200 women and children. His military incursions into Florida created a political problem for Spain, which in 1819 agreed to give Florida and the United States in 1821 in appreciation. A grateful U.S. government appointed Jackson Florida's first governor. Jackson assumed the governorship, then reverted back to his earlier practice of making money for himself and his friends by expropriating Indian land and black labor. He advised his friends to purchase Florida land and black slaves before the prices rose. The Indian Treaty was signed in 1819, and most of the Indians and free blacks were forced out of Florida. Jackson kept his promise to make free or cheap land available in Florida for cotton and sugar production, but some defiant Indians and black slaves dismissed the treaty and continued to fight for their land ownership rights for another 20 years. The Third Seminole War ended in 1840 in Osceola. The Seminole chief, when Osceola, the Seminole chief, died in captivity, and John Horse, the highest ranking black Indian leader, after nearly 50 years of battles, ceased fighting without ever having been defeated or captured. When finally concluded concluded the Seminole Wars had cost the U.S. government 1,500 soldiers and $20 million in military expenditures. In 1970, the U.S. Indian Claims Commission awarded more than 12 million in land reparations to the remainder of the Florida Seminole tribe. The government also offered an apology. Notably, however, the contributions made by Black Floridian ancestors were left out of the history books, and their offspring were left out of the apology as well as the reparations. Blacks have yet to receive any monetary reparations or historical recognition for their role in bringing Florida into the Union. Hey, folks. All right. Let's do this. Oh, shoot.